Thank you, John. I'm sure there will be some questions. We have a little bit of time, so please go to the microphone.
Mr. Ambassador, that was a wonderful presentation. I'm just wondering the extent to which you think the current Republican leadership shares your assessment, and in particular, the potential candidates for president in 2012.
Well, as happy as last Tuesday's election returns were, I think that they will have a fairly insignificant impact on foreign and national security policy. Obviously, Congress has a role in the Senate in the treaty process, Congress as a whole in the budgetary process. But responsibility for and direction and control of foreign policy essentially remain with the president. And I don't think that's going to change no matter which direction Obama goes in, whether he, in the great speculation in Washington today, does he do a Clinton after 1994 and try and move to the center, or does he continue to pursue an ideological agenda? I don't think we know the answer to that question yet. I think the big unknown is whether facing difficulty in making progress on what he wants to do domestically, he decides to ramp up some of the things he's talked about internationally, where the president has a lot more flexibility and where Congress, other than helping to shape the general political debate in the country, which is very important, they can't really constrain him as effectively as they can on domestic policy. So that's one of the things that I'm most worried about in the next 2 years, combined with the fact that although the president has unambiguously and resolutely tried to avoid foreign policy questions, facing them only when he really had no choice, like what to do in Afghanistan, the rest of the world has not been waiting for us to get our economic house in order. And however much it's important to us, and it absolutely is, what kind of health care system we have in this country, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Kim Jong-il really don't care, although I like to say I'm sure they both would have favored the public option. They see this as a very weak administration, and they're calculating their policies going forward on that basis. And so are our friends. And I think that's very worrisome, because what it suggests is you will have not simply the level of threats and problems we've had in the first 2 years, but you'll see a rising and accelerating level of threats, as in the cases of the extraordinary good fortune we've had in avoiding a terrorist attack just in the last 18 months, even just in the weekend before the election. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. I have a question about Iran and the nuclear weapon. Do you think there is anything short of a military strike by either Israel or United States we can stop this, regime from approaching building nuclear weapon, given the fact that our last chance was when there was a green movement in Iran, and President Obama basically ignored it because he was too busy appeasing, a regime of mullahs in Iran. Thank you.
Right. Well, I think right now the most likely outcome with respect to Iran is that it gets nuclear weapons. And even the Obama administration admitted several months ago that Iran could have a nuclear weapons capability within a year. I think there's a lot we don't know about Iran's program. They could be a lot closer to that. They have proceeded more deliberately in recent years because I think they don't believe they are threatened. And certainly in the last 2 years, I don't think they're threatened at all by the Obama administration. I fear that the president believes that the fallback position on Iran is that we can contain and deter Iran once it gets nuclear weapons. I think this is badly mistaken. I think the calculus of deterrence with respect to a regime like Iran posing an asymmetric threat to us and our friends and allies in the region and around the world is very different than the calculus of the Cold War standoff with the Soviet Union. Even if I'm wrong about that, the nuclear weapons problem in the Middle East doesn't stop with Iran. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, almost surely Saudi Arabia will, Egypt, Turkey, perhaps others, so that in a very short period of time, 5 to 10 years, you could see half a dozen countries in the region with nuclear weapons. And if you didn't like the bipolar nuclear standoff of the Cold War, imagine a multipolar nuclear standoff in the very volatile Middle East. So that's why I think a lot of what we're seeing now of the efforts at sanctions, which the administration agreed to after a year and a half of opposing them, the continued efforts of negotiation, which we'll see certainly with the Perm 5 in Germany and Iran before the end of this month, maybe even next week, are all going to come to naught. So the real question is, you've got two alternatives. One is in Iran with nuclear weapons. The other is a preemptive military strike by the United States or Israel. It's not going to be by the Obama administration. So the burden of that decision falls on Israel. Now, let's make one more point on that score. It is extremely unattractive and undesirable to contemplate having to use military force against Iran's nuclear program. But when you compare it to the other option of having an Iran with nuclear weapons, that's why you have to look at it. The choice that Israel basically faces is not a choice between the world as it is today versus the world after a strike against Iran's program. That's not the choice. If that were the choice, that'd be easy. The world as it is today is disappearing. The choice is between the world after a strike on the nuclear program and the world where Iran has nuclear weapons. And I think that there's not a lot of time within which that choice is going to be made. And so we could well have a very, very difficult series of decisions for the president to make, whether at the famous 3 a.m. call or maybe even at high noon, that he's going to have to make his mind up about. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day.